The conceit of a lover's yearning for that which is hidden is also a literary trope. Inflamed by lust, Apollo in Ovid's Metamorphosis is not content to gaze at Daphne's lovely features, but longs to behold the nymph's flesh beneath her robe, as that which is hidden he deems lovelier, in Ovid's words. This imputing of a heightened erotic content to that which is hidden or concealed, that which can only be revealed by the actively engaged lover voyeur who opens the shutter or lifts the curtain or removes the concealing robes, is a conceit that informs many of the works in the profane love section of the exhibition. Raphael's portrait of his mistress is not only a literal depiction of an actual sitter, however. It's also an image of idealized Platonic beauty. The foliate screen behind her contains branches of laurel, a tree that by its etymology invokes Laura, the beloved of the poet Petrarch, and the archetype of the ideal woman or mistress. Laurel is also a symbol of chastity, a virtue Petrarch extolled in Laura, and that Raphael here imputes to his mistress. Through this artistic act of conjuring his own chaste and virtuous Laura, Raphael is equated with Petrarch. The painter is a poet, and his portrait is an analog of his poetic formulation of beauty as, quote, a certain idea which comes into my head. This is a conceit ascribed, attributed to Raphael, though it's only recorded in a letter written a couple of years after his death, in which the words are assigned to him. His idea, in other words, is a cerebral synthesis of the best features of many, rather than a literal likeness of an individual. This Platonic conceit is a topos reprised from antiquity. According to Pliny the Elder, the painter Zeuxis combined features of the 5 prettiest girls he could find in order to create a sufficiently beautiful portrait of Helen of Troy. And it finds a literary counterpart in the Renaissance in the writings of Raphael's friend, the poet Pietro Bembo, concerning the transcendental power of perfect beauty, an idea that resonates in Raphael's depiction of his ideal beauty. If Raphael and contemporaries like Bembo and Castiglione were captivated by the idea of perfect beauty, it was the carnal real, rather than the abstract ideal, that engaged the creative imaginations of many other artists, poets, and painters and patrons in Renaissance Rome. On this less exalted stage, the roles of Apollo and Apelles, classical paradigms for the poet and the painter, are played not by Bembo and Raphael, but by Pietro Aretino and Giulio Romano. And here they are, both shown a little later in life. On the left, Aretino, a self-avowed anti-Petrarch and sharp-tongued satirist, Aretino was famous for his lewd and scabrous verses, while his friend and collaborator, Raphael's preeminent pupil and heir, Giulio Romano, shown on the right, rather weary-looking near the end of his life, produced some of the most explicitly erotic images of the 16th century. Giulio's portrait of a woman with a mirror patently derives, I jumped ahead too much, from Raphael's Fornarina. And the Fornarina is represented in our exhibition by a very, very faithful and exact replica done perhaps even during Raphael's own lifetime, lest you be deceived that you're looking at the real thing, but it's a very good stand-in. So you'll see these two images juxtaposed in the exhibition. But a number of subtle changes transform the image, Giulio's image on the left, from Petrarchan icon to Renaissance centerfold. Raphael's symbolically charged foliage is replaced by a topographical view of a courtyard with a servant in the distance. No praiseworthy virtues are ascribed to this nude woman, and the poetic ambiguity of Raphael's invention is absent. Giulio's sitter is neither a Platonic formulation of ideal perfect beauty, nor Laura to his Petrarch. Rather, she is, without doubt, a courtesan. Courtesans were essentially high-class prostitutes, as distinguished from ordinary, cheaper puttane, or common prostitutes. They were fixtures in 16th century Italy, particularly in Rome. And I show you two images from a series of prints showing stations of life of Roman women, and among the 6 stages featured, one is a widow on the left and the other is a courtesan on the right. So they were just really just part of society in Rome in the 16th century, where the institutionalized clerical and nominally celibate culture made for a more open tolerance of such women than in most other Italian cities, at least in the period before the Counter-Reformation. And even after that, in the later 16th century, the civic government of Rome continued to defend their presence against papal opposition, arguing that wealthy prostitutes were both an economic magnet and a source of tax revenue. And to outward appearances, they deceptively resembled honest women, and we can see that from the prints on the screen. Although at times, and more often in Venice, where there were far more numerous sumptuary laws than were ever imposed in Rome, they were either prohibited or solely allowed, depending on the moment, to sport certain kinds of jewels, veils, and ribbons. Famed for their beauty, wit, and refinement, or conversational skills, and often learned, cultured, and well-spoken, many courtesans, like Machiavelli's mistress, Barbara Faccani Salutati, were also accomplished musicians or singers, or gifted poets in the mode of the famous Venetian courtesan Veronica Franco, probably here on the screen, who is both the author of and inspiration for elegant Petrarchan verses. And if a courtesan's talents weren't genuine, she could at least contrive to emulate such polish or refinement by following the instructions of Aretino's Nana to her daughter, the would-be cortigiana onesta Pippa, to, quote, play a little tune you've learnt for fun, hammer at the clavichord, strum the lute, or pretend to be reading Ariosto, Petrarch, or Boccaccio. That the sitter in Giulio's portrait is one such cortigiana or courtesan is communicated by her inviting gesture and seductive body language. Her erotic offering of flesh is in fact part of the stock erotic repertoire, and we see that image repeated like a leitmotif throughout the exhibition. I'm showing you 3 examples here on the screen. And both the precious trinkets on the table beside her, to her right, your left, and the opulent jewels that she wears, not to mention certain kinds of expensive pieces of clothing, such as silk stockings or fabrics like that arrayed on the balcony. These kinds of items were also, in fact, expressly associated with courtesans, as many 16th century written documents and accounts attest. And I'm showing you a piece in the exhibition kindly brought to our attention by Dora's husband, in fact, who believes that this is actually a casket, a jewel case, specifically made for a courtesan because of its very erotic imagery that would have been inappropriate for an honest woman. It's Cupid caressing his mother Venus to her obvious enjoyment. So we were very happy to have that in the exhibition in the section dealing with courtesans. One dazzled foreign visitor to Rome, remarking in 1549 on the city's courtesans, observed that they were decked with jewels as if they were queens. And this courtesan, the woman in this picture, wears precisely that kind of expensive, elaborate jewelry. Carnal commerce, the exchange of sexual favors for material goods, was often the only means through which many women could ever aspire to own such jewels and luxury objects. Nana assures Pippa that she'll eventually get used to whatever unpleasantness comes with their particular line of work. And she says to her, bear in mind that the stench, the snot, the revolting breath, the filth, the habits and language of your lovers are like rancid wine. After drinking it for 3 days, you forget the smell. In other words, all in a day's work. One Hieronima Lena, interrogated by Roman officials in a case involving prostitution, confessed that she had only consented to physical relations with the city's police chief in order to acquire his attractive gold chain. Asked by her neighbor Livia, a carpenter's wife, Hieronima, what would you sooner have, the gold chain he is wearing or him? She promptly replied, I'd sooner have the chain than him. Her client, Valeria, the police chief, seems to have been under no illusions as to the source of his appeal to Hieronima. In testifying about the inception of their liaison, he recounted, I knew her, he means in the biblical sense, because her own mother acted as a go-between and told me that her daughter was in love with my chain.